Well, it's the holiday season. We're gonna go make a simple project. Been asked a lot if I do these, and I do. I just don't sell a lot of them because they're kind of a novelty item, but they're fun. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do a spike knife today out of a railroad spike. And we're gonna sharpen it to where it'll shave the hair off my arm. So let's go get this in the forge and get started. Hello YouTube, welcome back. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and Happy Thanksgiving. All right, so we're making a spike knife here. And we have it turned on the diagonal or on the diamond. We're going to be forging it in that orientation so that we can get more spread, more use out of our steel. You can do it on the flat side, and you'll basically get the same knife, but you have to work a little bit harder to get that steel to spread out. So we turn on the diagonal and we forge it down on the diamond. So this first heat's pretty standard. Get a thumb out there where it looks like a thumb, and then we start using the different types of hammers to spread our steel out here. And you can really see it on the diagonal right there in that shot. Here we are on the second heat. We got our 16-ounce half ball being out, and we're now establishing the blade versus the spine side here. Everything's still on the diagonal. We're just establishing which side is going to be our spine and which side is going to be our cutting edge. Now, normally you could, well, not normally, you could do it two different ways. You could then forge in your tip and then knock the tip down on your edge side. I don't do it that way. I like establishing my edge right from the get-go and forging towards the spine. That's how I do it. You can do it any way you want, however it gets the job done. We're still staying with the half ball here. Now we're going to be drawing out that edge with the half ball side of our hammer, really elongating that steel, spreading that steel out, establishing where our finger catch is going to be, really isolating the handle versus the cutting edge or the blade. Now we have established a bolster area up in there that is the transition from the blade into the handle. So the bolster is that transition area right there around where the finger catch is, or where your pointer finger is going to be. Now we're using the flat side of our half ball here. This is a 16-ounce half ball. We're using a pair of slotted jaws as well to hold on to the head. This works really well, but I highly suggest if you're going to do a lot of these, get yourself a pair of spike tongs. They're relatively cheap online, but if you know how to make tongs, go make yourself a set. It'll save you a lot of headache. So we're back to the 3-pound hammer here, really moving steel away from that spine and further isolating our handle. You can really see it take shape there, right there at the midway of the heat here. And now we're back on the spine, elongating and moving that steel up, really making a nice tall blade here. Now this is kind of a forge to finish type here, but we're really going to be shaping this once on the grinder to the profile we want. So we're going to use what steel we have, get our angles right, make sure everything flows from the handle into the blade seamlessly, and you can really see on this heat that diagonal look there, just how much steel we have available to us by going on that diagonal. Now we should probably do a versus video where we go on the flat versus the diagonal. I think that's what we'll do next. We'll have a versus. Are we getting more use out of the steel going on the diagonal, or is that just personal preference for the most part? I believe we are getting more use out of the steel, but we'll have to see. So we'll do a versus video, go on forging a spike knife out of the flat or forging it off of the diagonal. Everything tells me that we're getting more usage out of the steel going on the diagonal. So this is a pretty standard way I forge a blade.
forge the blade out first, then come back and work the handle, no matter what type of knife I'm making, no matter what steel I'm using. We're now on to a barreled wolf jaw here, taking the 16-ounce half ball and really working that nose. Right now it's looking like an upturned, not a trailing point, it's an upturned nose skinner. That's what it's looking like. That's not what it turns out to be. We have more of a drop point in the end. Spoiler alert, kind of a drop point going on here. Now we're really trying to just elongate that nose out, thicken up our edge, thicken up our spine, so we have enough material there to grind on, so that we're not getting so thin when we do clean up our sides, or I guess you call them the cheeks of the blade. Then we're not having this paper thin piece out there. So you got to continually upset when you're forging the blade, especially if you're limited on stock. Now if you're just smithing this off a big piece of flat bar, it doesn't matter. You'll get it to where it's a grindable thickness. If you're starting out with 1/8 inch stock, you're going to upset everything down. You're probably going to be right around a quarter inch thick. You get a rough shape there, you can grind it out. With a spike knife, you're limited by how much material you have, so you really have to know what you're doing and not necessarily plan it out. If that's how you work, then plan it out. I don't plan that way. I just know what I'm doing. I know what I want, kind of, and I just forge using the skills that I've garnered over 16 years of blacksmithing to tell me when it's time to stop. So we're still on the blade here. We're back on our 16-ounce half ball, really drawing out that edge. And I got a weird motion here with my hammer. I normally don't do. I started kind of pushing it, and I don't advocate for that technique, even though more smiths do that type of technique than not. It's really a wasted motion. You really should come straight down on your piece, and I'm not sure why I got into that technique, but it all worked out in the end. So now we're really establishing our bolster area here, tying everything in, kind of trying to get a nice even slick off the handle into the blade. Our handle's still relatively small. We haven't really began to upset that down and elongate it out to where we can get our hand inside the handle. And a lot of that comes back when we get to the grinding phase. We'll end up establishing our finger catch or finger choil a little bit more, and to allow our hand to fit nicely inside that handle and stay off the cutting edge. So we're working on the spine side here, hammering down into the anvil, using our cutting edge as kind of an anvil itself. It's not thickening that cutting edge. We're actually establishing and lengthening more of a spine thickness out there on the nose, knowing that we're going to be grinding back, and we need that thickness out there to get a nice full grind from the bolsters down to the tip. Now we're back on the edge here, working that nose. We thinned it out a little bit, so now we're upsetting back in. Some of these heats are a little more elongated and lengthy than others, because the longer you let it sit, the easier it is to thicken up wherever you're trying to upset steel into. So you tend to just kind of fold it over and make it all wavy when it's super hot. But that's still important heat that you need to use. And you can actually see how we're starting to get an even thickness on that cutting edge from the bolster area all the way through the tip, which is important when you're doing anything pre-grind. So it has a weird kind of banana look to it here. We're going to end up taking that out. We don't want a trailing point on this blade. We want a relatively flat back going in, or flat spine going in to our handle, because we will be twisting this, which you'll see here in later clips. Now I'm working this really cold. We're really hammering down on that bolster area. That's a very crucial transition there, and if that doesn't feel good, the knife isn't going to be used at all. It'll just be a wall hanger piece, because your fingers just won't feel that great on it. All right, now we are working the flats here with the 16 ounce half ball. We're off the diamond, we're on the flats, and you can actually see how that blade is at a 45-degree angle to the rest of the handle. Now this is kind of tricky here. We don't want to really come down hard where the bolster and that transition is going from the handle to the blade, because it's right at a corner, and so you're really going to mar that transition. And we did a little bit, but we had enough steel there where we ended up taking out in the end. But we're really getting a good upset here, thinning that out, isolating our spike head really well, and making sure all of our lines go very nicely into that blade. If that transition is screwy, it's really going to inhibit the use and the sale of that blade, and it generally just becomes a giveaway piece at that point. But we're thick enough here. If we did do anything haphazardly, we're gonna be able to get it back. So now we're really working on this finger catch here, establishing some flats, even though it is on the diagonal, establishing some flats there, so that when we get into the grind, we have a reference point for when we're grinding here. And we're going to take about 1/8 of an inch, maybe 3/16 of an inch more of that blade out to establish a much more comfortable handle, and where our hand just falls right into place. So as you upset that finger catch there, you don't want to get too far in the process. You have to go back to the flats and take the mushroom out, or you're going to end up with a lap in there, or a cold shut right there at the finger well, and it's not going to be well. Even if you grind it off, in the end, it's going to create indentations, and you're going to lose lots of mass right there at that finger catch. So here we go. We're going to start twisting here, and we have our monkey wrench with a piece of metal welded on the end of it. I'm going to build a better twisting to latch onto these heads. It worked fine. You know, maybe weight down my travel vise a little bit here. I don't have an established shop vise yet in the shop floor, bolted down to the floor, so it does tend to move, so you end up losing a little bit of heat. And it started to twist really tight right next to the bolster, or right before you transition into the finger catch, which isn't that big of a deal, but I couldn't do any more twists in it. Now, could I have isolated that, cooled that off with a little bit of a water quench? Yes, I could. That's the beauty of using a railroad spike. You're not going to really hurt the structure of your steel using these by going into a pre-quench to isolate the heat away from where you don't want to twist, because that's really thin in there, and it's going to twist before any of the thicker stuff does. It turned out really good though. All right, now we're going to go over the horn and just put a little kick to our railroad spike head. That we don't want a super bend in there. I just wanted that kind of to kick in at the bottom on the spikes, so that it really locks your hand into place, and it turned out really great. You'll see here at the end when we get it done. We're about a little over halfway through this process here, getting this knife done. Now you're going to see me here once we get done with the grind here. We're going to go into the quench, but let's talk about a vertical grind versus a horizontal grind. Now, in this instance, we want to establish the bolsters there, but we don't want to hog off more steel than what we need to. So you go into a vertical grind using that top wheel to establish a kind of a swooping grind up into the bolster, into the handle, and you're not left with these really deep belt lines in there right where you're trying to transition, which can get you in trouble when you're doing this type of grind or type of blade, and you're grinding with the grain instead of against the grain, which is what a horizontal grind does, and you end up having to chase it back. And 9 times out of 10, if you're not careful, you're going to end up with a very thin bolster area, because you've had to chase these grind lines in there instead of just going with a vertical grind and really getting that nice transition in there that you can really polish up with a conditioning. So we're getting ready to stamp here, and I kind of screwed this up. I didn't get a good stamp the first time, and then as you'll see here in a minute, I go to kind of screw around with it, get it reset there, and it falls off the anvil. You know, no harm, no foul, not a big deal. I wouldn't suggest going back to a second stamp unless you're really confident with your stamping ability. It's taken me a couple years to get the feel right to where I can get my stamp back in the groove and then re-stamp it again. And we're still pretty hot here. We're still right around 1200 degrees. There's still a little bit of color left in there with the naked eye. The camera doesn't really pick it up all right, and we get a really good stamp there. So no harm, no foul. But we do get a little bit of a warpage when we're stamping, and so we have to go in, straighten it up a little bit. It's a slight warp that starts just in front of where we stamp towards the tip side of it, and you can see it right there. I'm going to just take and tap it here a little bit, and then we go into the quench. We're quenching these in water. We're at a high temperature, above critical temperature, to almost a yellow color that by the time I got over here, the camera doesn't really pick up the true color. And what we're looking for is a very white or light gray underneath the fire scale, which you didn't get a chance to see it there, but you'll know it when you see it. It's just a matte, light gray finish on there. Now, something I didn't do that I should have done is put in my differential heat tube within my my forge. I have about a 1/2 inch thick square tubing that's 5 inches tall that fits right down inside my forge that heat the tube up, and then I'm not having a blast furnace on my steel, which will tend to boil or overheat any thin sections, which is what happened here. And so what I end up doing is I go in and I remove all of that surface texture from the blade. Luckily we left enough meat in there to where the blade turned out really good, and it's a really soft grind. You do a lot of vertical grinding with the wheel, with the motion of the belt. You can see right here where this is on the conditioning side, and I didn't actually film me taking out any of that blade texture. Right now I'm just conditioning the surface here and making sure all my lines go in the right direction, and that is the beauty of having a bolster area that's integral to the blade. You can really get that vertical grinds going. You can still do the same thing if you have a sharpening choil and a ricasso area. You're just going to have these soft plunge lines, these kind of half round plunge lines, rather than those 90-degree plunge lines doing the vertical grind. So you can still do the same thing if you're putting a ricasso in there, or so you have a true blade break between your finger catch and your cutting edge. Right now we're establishing our bevel. Now, with something this type of steel, you want a really long bevel. I started out with too short of a bevel, and when I say short, it wasn't very high or tall on the, we're going to call them cheeks of the blade, the sides of the blade. And so this is like a 180 grit, or an 80, this is a 60 grit ceramic belt we're using here to establish, and then we re-establish up here on the slack belt where we're actually stropping this backwards. So this is a 180 grit zirconian. I don't suggest getting anything for other than finish grinds on the edge. This is all I use these belts for. I also use them for my sheaths too, to take and grind off extra leather that's there to make everything look good. That's that brown streak down the center. So we ended up having to reestablish a much taller bevel on this to get our razor on the edge. Now with like a 52-100 or a 1095, you can have a shorter bevel and get the razor edge. There's carbon in there. Basically, by having a taller bevel, you're reinforcing the edge to be able to have a sharper edge on that. So just keep in mind when you're doing these types of things. So, and then we're getting into what everybody loves to see is a railroad spike knife that is a razor.
Spike knife, sharp enough to shave with. Fully hardened, ready to go.